Globalization and economic change. When we see countries shifting to a post industrial status, they go through a deindustrialization process where the industrial factories that they had in their country are being shipped to places where we have cheaper labor based on lower wages and also because they have lower environmental standards. As this happens, we start to see a rise of SEZs or special economic zones. These are zones where we have no taxes or tariffs as goods pass from one country to another. We've talked about some of these special economic zones before. We talked about the maquiladora plants in Mexico, where on one side of the border, we oftentimes see the American side where the higher paid labor is done. And then on the Mexican side, we see the assembly plants where people are being used in order to have lower wages for the assembly process. We also talked about special economic zones when we talked about the Southeast Asian city model. Here we can see in Vietnam, we can see some of these special economic zones where there's going to be corporate tax exemptions. When we look at the Southeast Asian city model, we see the port zone. What happens in these special economic zones is that as long as a product enters in through the port zone and goes straight into the factory zone, for either the Western countries, WC, or for the AC, alien commercial zone, which means Chinese companies, as long as it stays within the factory zone and then the port zone, no taxes are going to, or tariffs are going to apply. We can see an advertisement here for a special economic zone. We can see the port area where products can be brought in. We see the assembly plants connected right there. And as we saw in the Southeast Asian city model, we see this medium density housing occurring right around these assembly plants. We have also talked about measuring development, and we did a lot of this discussion when we were doing our baby boxes in Unit 1. We talked about the Human Development Index, the Gender Inequality Index, and we thought about these as ways of comparing developed countries to developing regions. They help us to look beyond just economics to also take into consideration things like education, health, and gender equality when we're trying to measure a country's development. College Board does want you to understand some of our composite indexes. Human Development Index put out by the United Nations is one such index. They're going to look at dimensions such as long life and healthy life, knowledge, and a decent standard of living. In order to calculate the health and the long life, we're going to look at life expectancy. For knowledge, we're going to take a look at two different ways of measuring. One is the expected years, and one is the main years. Expected years are when a student is entering school. How many years do we expect them to be in school? Will they receive an elementary education, a middle school, a high school, or will they receive college education? That lets us know where the country is headed. But we also want to know what the current working force has for their education. So we're going to look at the mean years of schooling for people over 25. We're going to put these two factors together and produce an education index. In order to calculate decent standard of living, we're going to look at the gross national income per capita or per person, and we're also going to adjust it for something called purchase power parity, which just means we're going to kind of put together a basket of things that we think every single person in the world needs. And we're going to say we need to have food, we need to have access to housing. And they're going to put those things together and they're going to compare how easily people can purchase the things they need for a good life with the income that they have. They're going to put that index together, and then together with the life expectancy index, the education index, and the GNI index, they're going to calculate the level of development. We have very high, high, We are also going to see the Gender Inequality Index. This is also a composite index. We're going to look at health, empowerment, and the labor market. For health, we're going to look at maternal mortality ratio and also look at adolescent birth rate to come up with a female reproductive health index. Looking at how many women die during childbirth or how many women become pregnant before they are 18 helps us to understand whether or not they have access to healthcare and contraception. It may also be some sort of an indication when we're looking at adolescent birth rate about whether or not we're seeing girls in school. For the empowerment section, we're looking at male to female population with secondary education. Are they equal? Are they not? And then for parliamentary seats, we're also going to see, do women who are 50% of the population make up 50% of the population of the parliamentary seats? Lastly, we're going to look at male to female labor force participation rates. As we're looking at this, we want to think about whether or not this is actually taking enough things into account. For example, we could have an equal number of women and men in the workforce, but that doesn't mean that they have equal jobs. Are women going to be relegated to things like secretaries while men are CEOs? Or we could be saying, are men and women who perform similar functions in the economy, are they going to be receiving similar salaries? We simply can't tell those things with this index. There are also a lot of things that governments can do and that we can have for banks to help out or nonprofits to help out in order to achieve higher levels of development. One way that we could encourage people to start businesses is going to be microloans. We could also have infrastructure and investment, public-private partnerships, and we are going to think about what are some of the ways that policies can be involved in shaping our economic development. For microloans, oftentimes women who have been living in subsistence farming, they haven't been earning a wage. So they don't have money or proof of income that would allow them to get traditional loans from places like banks. There are nonprofits and groups who are going to provide money for women to start businesses. Oftentimes, these microloans are for very small amounts, and it allows women to also get training about how to have business skills, how to do record keeping. And it can really be an opportunity for women to change their economic situation. One of the problems with microloans is that they often are going to come with very high interest rates, which means that if they can't pay them back, it can put them in an even worse economic situation than they were in before. We also are going to see that there are quite a few things that governments can do in order to try to encourage business. We talked about some of these things when we talked about the research triangle in North Carolina. We talked about the fact that they really went all in on trying to make sure that they are providing people who want to do those high-tech, high-knowledge jobs with the education and training that they need in order to be able to do those jobs. We also can see that governments on either a city level or a county level or state level can reduce taxes for people to be able to come in. We also could see some deregulation. In order for us to have this globalized world, we need to make sure that we have transportation to ship things all around. Planes, trains, trucks, and ships revolutionized our ability to actually transport goods around the world. But the one that is going to be the most important and most changing for our ability to globalize is going to be containerization. Breakup bulk points were one of the most costly parts of transportation. A breakup bulk point is when you switch from one type of transportation, have to break up the cargo and add and put it on a new type of transportation. So what used to happen before containerization is that you would do something like you would load the ship in the port. Then you would get to the next port. You would have to by hand unload all of your goods, put them on either a train or a truck. You'd have to transport them. Then you'd have to break apart the bulk again and add it to a new piece of transportation. This was really costly. Every time you had to move products from one type of transportation to another. Remember, that's called break of bulk points, where you're switching from one type of transportation to another and having to unpack everything. The beauty of containerization and the shipping container is this. Do you see that ship back there? That container came in on the ship. We're able to use that giant crane to move that container and put it on the truck. That container can also go onto a train. So we can move our products from ship to train to truck while never unpacking it. That makes our transportation astronomically less expensive. We also, at the beginning of the year, talked about the Sustainable Development Goals. These are put out by the UN. When we're trying to think about a world in which we have everybody having good access to a good life, we want to be giving growth to all parts of the world in ways that are sustainable. The number one goal is no poverty, then zero hunger, good health and well-being, quality education, gender equality, clean water and sanitation, affordable and clean energy, decent work and economic growth, industry, innovation and infrastructure, reduced inequalities, sustainable cities and communities, responsible consumption and production, climate action, preserving life below water, preserving life on land, strong peace and justice institutions, and then providing partnerships to achieve these goals. One of the things that I want to highlight here is number 7, the affordable and clean energy. Don't underestimate the fact that in order for us to actually create a sustainable world, we need to be shifting our industry to more sustainable forms of energy. We need to be shifting from things like coal to things like hydroelectric, to wind energy, to solar energy. We need to be making sure that we are doing things in a way that is sustainable and will provide us with a better future.